Hi everyone, my name is Alex Bacalja and I work in the Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne. My presentation today is speculative in nature. It does not address research already conducted or even research currently underway. For quite a few years now, I have been conducting research looking at digital games as texts or as literature in secondary English classroom. This is work that is built on my experience as a high school teacher and my PhD studies. However, more recently, I've become increasingly interested in emergent thinking around speculative philosophies and speculative pedagogies. And I'm here today to share some preliminary thoughts about the potential for digital games in formal learning environments to be played and studied from the perspective of speculative pedagogies. Much of what schools do is, in particular English classrooms, could be called welding. Post-colonial literary theorists have used the term welding to explain the effects that all texts have in world making. Edward Said argued that all texts are worldy because they are compiled, composed, and read in the world. While for Hayot, welding is not an act of replication or of capture, but rather inclusion and exclusion. To weld is to enclose, but also to exclude. Whilst for Donna Haraway, she refers to welding as a generative practice and a contributing factor in knowledge making and world making. Put more simply, when we play a game, we are engaged in welding. When we study a game, we are engaged in welding. Therefore, how we read and study texts or games will affect the kinds of welding or world building, world making that occurs. Digital games have been lauded for a long time now as tools that facilitate a wide range of social and cultural practices associated with teaching and learning. Many of you would be familiar with those authors that explore the relationship between digital games, literacy and learning, people like James G., Steinkuhler, Squire, Barab and others. There's also an emerging body of knowledge focusing specifically on how digital games might represent forms of literature in the secondary English classroom that could support or even replace print-based texts. And you can see some examples on your screen of some of the work that's coming out of this particular field. Much of this existing literature captures case studies where the teaching involved a very clear sense of correct meanings, and the students are required to comprehend these correct meanings, a sense of right answerism, as Paulo Freire would put it. This includes understanding the design decisions of game designers, the significance of multiple modes like language, sound, imagery, movement, and connections between the game world and the world outside of the game. However, I'm interested in how speculative pedagogies might offer different ways of engaging in the play and study of games with young learners. Speculative pedagogies are built on the notion that pedagogy might be reconceptualized as a tool for confronting and challenging normative ways of teaching and learning. Much like science fiction, speculative fabulations and philosophies are interested in imagining alternative ways of being alive and honouring alternative ways of knowing. For Gill, speculative works are often set in new worlds. They're characterised by unfamiliar places, and these seemingly new worlds, which are often just disguises for our own, create conditions that contrast with their audience's understanding of ordinary reality. Not a lot has been written about speculative pedagogies. However, I've put together here a little bit of a synthesis of how we might characterise these speculative pedagogies. And they include tactics of defamiliarisation, cognitive estrangement. It involves telling and making stories that have the capacity to reveal something that wasn't there before. It might involve a field of practices orientated towards the future, adopting experimental modes of practice or thinking, using speculative design to open up new perspectives, alternative ways of being. The point is, as Carsten suggests, to develop a pedagogy that is appropriate for what she calls troubled times, and that move us towards more open systems of knowledge production in education. And all of this has left me with this question for investigation and for conversation with all of you. How can digital game play in formal learning environments be combined with speculative pedagogies to imagine different worlds and rethink humanist approaches to schooling? So what I want to do now is to delve into some practical suggestions about how educators might employ speculative pedagogies alongside digital games, using one game in particular, Surviving Mars, as an example. Surviving Mars is a city-building simulation game that allows the player the agency to colonize the red planet within certain constraints. I'll give you a brief summary of the game. Upon arrival of a shuttle on the surface, the player is tasked with using drones and rovers to prepare the landing for the arrival of humans. Mining operations, electrification, oxygen, water generation, construction of shelter, these are all the first steps to prepare the ground for colonists, and players have to select colonists with different characteristics to travel to the red planet. So what age will they be? Child, an adult, a senior? What specializations might they have? Are they a botanist, an engineer, a medic? What traits do they bring? Are they celebrities, hippies, nerds, or even gamers? So if the aim is to approach the game world, the game story and game play, so that learners can experience this defamiliarization and cognitive estrangement and thinking otherwise, as De Freitas puts it, how might we do this? And I suggest a number of activities here. Activity 1 might be a language activity. Students could keep a record of the language that has been built into the game. Terms like colonize, colonists, discovery, development, advancement. They could make lists of key terms from within the game and then explain how the terms are used within the game. They could then introduce new terms to replace these terms. Language that challenges and disturbs. Language that opens up new perspectives about the game world. Activity 2 could be a free play activity accompanied by a reflective journal. Students would be encouraged to play the game as it is intended and to note down the decisions they make during gameplay. At the end of each free play session, students identify why they made their decisions, what informed their decision making. They could then discuss other possible decisions that they could have made but didn't. This could then be the catalyst for playing the game differently, for imagining alternative ways of playing or being within this game world, but also outside of the game world. Activity 3 could involve students in modding practices, both in the game and on paper. And these could be used to show how design can be used as a means for speculating, for speculative how things could be. These modding practices could involve installing existing mods, making their own digital assets to import into the game, or simply brainstorming with pen and paper possible mods that would reorient the game based on new imaginative propositions. Activity 4 could focus on word making across texts. The teacher could bring in examples of other games, poems, films, perhaps short stories that involve notions of Earth or other worlds that are different to our own, and students could create lists of similarities and differences across these worlds. These could be the catalyst for discussion about what is possible, what is improbable, what is impossible. And considering these preliminary activities, I couldn't help but notice that the teaching and learning activities are dependent on the selection of the particular game, and it had me wondering about other popular digital games that could be deployed for welding or speculative welding. Perhaps educators could use Bioshock 2 to trouble the relationship between humans and machines. Maybe Civilization 5 could use as the basis for challenging Western notions of progress and civility. We could introduce Papers, Please to ask questions about the different values of human life. Maybe No Man's Sky could be the catalyst for exploring how humans are connected or disconnected from their environment. Maybe we ask questions about identity, sex, and gender through Sims 4. The challenge, as I see it, is a pedagogic one. It is for teachers to draw on pedagogies that will enable this kind of work, pedagogies that go beyond free play alone. Thanks, everyone.